I returned to my hidden dream cottage. My son's family was already living there like owners. The locks on my own cottage had been changed. Not broken. Not forced. Changed, clean and deliberate. Like someone had measured the doorframe and ordered new hardware weeks in advance. I stood on the porch I built with my own savings, the porch nobody else even knew existed, and I watched my granddaughter's bicycle lying in the grass where my rose bed used to be. That's when I understood. This wasn't a mistake. This was a plan. And I had walked right into the middle of it. My name is Mary. I'm 68 years old, and before I tell you what happened when I got my keys back, I need you to do two things for me. Hit that like button because it tells me you're still with me, and hit subscribe because where this story goes you won't want to miss it. And while you're at it, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching this from tonight. I read every single one. Now, let me take you back to the beginning because you need to understand what that cottage meant before you understand what it cost me to take it back. I married young, 22 years old, a small wedding, a smaller apartment, and a husband who worked construction 6 days a week. We had one son. I won't use his real name in this story, so I'll just call him my son, because some things are still too tender to say plainly, even now. I raised him the way my own mother raised me, with more love than money, and I told myself that was enough. For years it was. My husband passed when our son was 24. I won't dwell on that grief here, except to say that a woman who loses her husband young learns very quickly that she has to build her own safety net, because nobody is coming to build it for her. I went back to work. I took extra shifts. I clipped coupons and skipped vacations and told myself every single sacrifice was temporary. That one day I'd have something just for me. That something turned out to be 4 acres of overgrown land 2 hours outside the city, with a crumbling one-room hunting shack sitting on it like a dare. I bought it when I was 41 years old, with money I had hidden in an account my son never knew existed. I didn't tell anyone. Not my sister, not my closest friend, not even my son, who was newly married by then and building his own life. This was mine. Just mine. For the next 27 years, that land became my secret. I drive out on weekends when I could spare them. I taught myself to lay flooring from library books. I hired a local carpenter named Walter, an old widower himself, who helped me frame out 2 real bedrooms and a kitchen big enough to actually cook in. Piece by piece, dollar by dollar, that hunting shack became a cottage. A real one with a stone fireplace I paid for in installments over 3 years, and a porch that faced the sunset just right. I called it my hidden dream because that's exactly what it was. I never brought my son there. Not once. Some of you watching might think that's strange, keeping something so big from your own child, and maybe you're right to wonder. But I want to explain something to those of you who've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. Sometimes the only way to keep a dream alive is to keep it invisible. The moment you show people what you love, they start to have opinions about it. They start to have needs around it. I wasn't ready to share the one thing that was purely selfishly mine. I retired at 65. My plan, the plan I had been building quietly for nearly 3 decades, was simple. Sell my house in the city, move out to the cottage full-time, plant a real garden, get a dog, and spend my remaining good years somewhere that was entirely my own creation. I told my son I was retiring. I did not tell him where I planned to live. I figured I had time to explain it properly in my own way when I was ready. I wasn't ready fast enough. About 8 months before I made my move, my son and his wife hit a rough patch. Their landlord sold the building they were renting, gave them 60 days to vacate, and suddenly they were scrambling. I felt for them truly. Nobody wants to watch their child struggle to keep a roof over 2 grandchildren's heads. So when my son called me, sounding more stressed than I'd heard him in years, I made a mistake I still think about. I mentioned the cottage. Not the whole truth. Just enough. I told him I had a small property out in the country, mostly finished, that had been sitting empty while I decided what to do with it. I said maybe, just maybe, they could stay there temporarily while they found something permanent. Emphasis on temporarily. I remember saying that word twice in the same sentence, like I somehow knew I needed to nail it down. He thanked me like I'd handed him a lifeline. Drove out there the very next weekend with his wife to see it. I gave him a spare key, the old one, from before I'd had the new smart lock installed on the front door for my own eventual move-in. I told him again clearly this was short-term. 90 days, maybe 120 at the absolute most while they got back on their feet. That was 14 months ago. I want to pause here and tell you something important because I know some of you are already forming opinions about my son, and I want to be fair to him, at least at this point in the story. I don't believe he set out to steal his own mother's dream. I believe what happened was slower than that and in some ways sadder. I believe comfort has a way of erasing borrowed time. 90 days becomes 6 months, becomes a school year, becomes what I found. During those 14 months I called. I visited twice, though it stung both times, seeing my careful choices slowly disappearing under someone else's habits. The hand-stripped pine table I'd found at an estate sale, the one I'd sanded myself over 3 weekends, was covered in a plastic tablecloth with cartoon characters on it. My rose bed had been dug up. I asked about it gently, and my daughter-in-law told me quite cheerfully that roses attract bees and the children play in that yard. I said nothing. I told myself I was being patient. I told myself this was still temporary. Then, 10 months in, I got a call from my son. He didn't ask me anything. He informed me. He told me they'd decided to enroll my granddaughter in the elementary school in that district because, and I quote him almost exactly, "it just makes more sense for us to be settled." I remember standing in my kitchen in the city, phone against my ear, feeling something cold settle into my stomach. Settled. In my house. With my furniture. Under my roof I had paid for alone, dollar by careful dollar, for 27 years. I still didn't fight it. Not yet. I told myself, foolishly, that once I officially moved out there myself, the awkwardness of overlap would force a natural conversation about timelines. I was wrong about that too, because 4 months ago, when I called to say I'd finally sold my city house and would be moving out to the cottage within the month, my daughter-in-law's voice changed on the phone. Got careful. Rehearsed almost. She said, "Oh, we should probably talk about that." I asked what there was to talk about. She said the kids were settled in their school, that pulling them out now would be disruptive, that maybe it made more sense for me to find a nice apartment closer to the city instead, since I was, in her words, more of a city person anyway. As if she knew, after 14 months of living inside my dream, what kind of person I was better than I did after 68 years of being myself. I hung up that phone and sat in my empty kitchen, in a house I had already sold, with movers scheduled in 3 weeks, and I understood something with total clarity. My cottage had quietly become theirs. Not through malice, maybe not even through conscious decision, but through the simple, brutal math of who was living where when the music stopped. And nobody had bothered to ask me if I minded that the music had stopped at all. That's when the sweetness in me, the part that kept saying temporary and I'm sure it's fine and I don't want to cause trouble, finally went quiet. And a different part of me, the part that had spent 27 years hauling lumber and negotiating with contractors and hiding money in an account nobody knew about, that part woke all the way up. Here's what people don't understand about a woman like me. I did not build that cottage by being soft. I built it by being patient, methodical, and quietly relentless. I was about to remind my family that those qualities don't disappear just because you're being kind for a while. The first thing I did was drive to that county courthouse and pull the deed. My name. Only my name. Not my son's, not my daughter-in-law's, no joint ownership, no verbal promise that would hold up anywhere except in their imagination. My late husband used to tease me for being the type to keep every receipt, every contract, every piece of paper that ever crossed my desk. That teasing had just become the most useful habit of my entire life. The second thing I did was call a real estate attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Whitfield, who specialized in property and family disputes. I told her everything. The purchase date, the loan I paid off alone, the fact that my son had never contributed a single dollar to that property, not toward the mortgage, not toward the renovations, not toward property taxes, nothing. I told her about the temporary arrangement and the calls and the conversation about the nice apartment closer to the city. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting once. When I finished, she said something I will never forget. She said, "Mary, this isn't complicated legally. It's only complicated emotionally. And I can't help you with the second part. But I can absolutely help you with the first." I told her I wanted to do this the right way. No shouting, no ugly scene, no drama for the grandchildren to remember later as the day their grandmother screamed at their parents. I wanted paper. I wanted process. I wanted to walk into that cottage with the full, undeniable weight of the law behind me, calm as still water, and I wanted my son to understand, without me raising my voice even once, exactly whose name was on that deed. Ms. Whitfield drafted a formal notice. 30 days to vacate, delivered properly, documented, dated. I want to be honest with you because I promised you the truth in this story and not just the satisfying parts. Signing that notice was one of the hardest things I've done since I buried my husband. My hand actually shook holding the pen. This was my son, my only child, and I was serving him legal papers to remove him from the home he had, in his own mind, started to think of as his family's. But I thought about my granddaughter's bicycle on my rose bed. I thought about the cartoon tablecloth over my hand-sanded table. I thought about 27 years of Saturday drives, alone, building something that was supposed to finally be mine at the very end of my working life. And I thought about the fact that nobody, not my son, not his wife, had once in 14 months, asked me how I felt watching my dream slowly become someone else's furniture arrangement. I mailed the notice. Then I called my son directly, because paper without a conversation felt like cowardice. And I have never once in my life been a coward. He was furious. I want you to hear that clearly because this part of the story doesn't feel good to tell. He accused me of choosing property over family. He said his children were being uprooted because of, and again I'm quoting closely, some sentimental idea about a house. He said I was punishing him for a temporary favor turning into something longer than planned, as if the length of that overstay had been some unavoidable accident of weather, and not 14 months of decisions made without me. I let him finish. Then I said something I had practiced saying calmly because I knew if I didn't practice it, I would say it in anger instead, and anger never lands the way you want it to. I said, I gave you 90 days out of love. You took 14 months out of comfort. That cottage was never a gift. It was a kindness, and kindness has a shelf life when it isn't respected. He didn't have an answer for that. Neither did his wife when she got on the phone a few minutes later, her voice climbing towards something sharp and defensive. She told me I was being cruel, uprooting children mid-school year. I told her evenly that she had known this house wasn't theirs since the day they moved in, and that the only person responsible for the timing of this disruption was whoever decided 14 months felt like an appropriate length for a 90-day favor. The 30 days passed. I won't pretend the move-out was peaceful. There were slammed doors. There was a period where my son stopped answering my calls entirely, which I'll admit hurt more than the property dispute ever did. My daughter-in-law posted something vague on social media about family members who choose houses over grandchildren, which several of my old friends were kind enough to screenshot and send me, out of concern rather than gossip, I believe. I didn't respond publicly to any of it. I didn't need to. I had a deed with my name on it, a paper trail 27 years deep, and a quiet certainty that I had been more than fair for far longer than fairness required. Some fights you win by being loud. This one I won by being immovable. On the 30th day, I drove out to the cottage myself. I brought Ms. Whitfield's paralegal with me, not for intimidation but simply as a witness, in case anything needed documenting. I want to tell you honestly, my heart was pounding the entire drive. 27 years of dreaming about walking through that door as its rightful permanent resident, and here I was walking through it as something closer to a landlord evicting her own child. The house was empty when I arrived. They'd left the day before, apparently, without a word to me. The rosebed was still torn up. The cartoon tablecloth was gone, but there were faint marks on my sanded table where something had scratched the finish. My smart lock had been reprogrammed at some point, which was actually the reason I'd needed a locksmith that very morning, the detail I mentioned at the start of this story. New locks on my own front door because somewhere in those 14 months, my family had quietly decided that even my access needed managing. I stood in that empty cottage, sunlight coming through the windows I had chosen myself, onto floors I had chosen myself, and for a moment I just cried. Not from anger. From something more complicated. Grief for the version of this homecoming I'd imagined for 27 years, and relief that, despite everything, the walls were still mine. Still standing. Still waiting. It's been 4 months since that day. I want to tell you the ending isn't a fairy tale, because I promised you honesty and I intend to keep that promise all the way through. My relationship with my son is still healing. We talk now carefully like two people rebuilding a bridge, one plank at a time. He apologized eventually, not for staying those extra months exactly, but for never once in 14 months asking me how it felt to watch it happen. That apology mattered more to me than any amount of drywall repair. My granddaughter still visits. She has her own room now, the one that used to have her bicycle marks in the grass outside it, and I've replanted half the rose bed, leaving a small patch open as a play space, because I discovered something in all of this. I don't actually need every inch of this dream to be untouched to still call it mine. I just needed it to be undeniably, unmistakably, legally and emotionally mine to decide about. I moved in permanently 6 weeks ago. I have a dog now, a scruffy little rescue named Biscuit, who sleeps at the foot of my bed in the room I designed for myself nearly 3 decades before I ever laid a single night in it. Some mornings I sit on that porch with my coffee and I still can't quite believe it's real, that after all those years of hiding a dream so no one could touch it, I still had to fight to keep it from being taken anyway. If there's a lesson in this story, and I think there is, it's this. Kindness is not the same thing as ownership, and generosity is not a permanent transfer of title. You can love your children with your whole heart, and still hold firm boundaries around what is yours. I gave my son 90 days out of love. I took back my cottage out of self-respect. Both of those things can be true about the same woman in the same story in the same life. If you've made it this far with me, thank you for listening to an old woman talk about roses and deeds and 30-day notices. If this story meant something to you, I'd love it if you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what I share next. And if you're willing, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one of them, usually right here on this porch, with Biscuit asleep at my feet and a cottage full of quiet, hard-won peace all around me.